You know that feeling, right? You spent an hour, maybe more, wrestling with a flat pack box from IKEA. There are confusing diagrams, a tiny Allen key, and at least one moment where you're pretty sure you've put a shelf on backwards. But then, you finish. You stand back and you look at that wobbly but standing bookshelf and you feel this irrational sense of pride. Well, that feeling has a name, the IKEA Effect. And today, we're going to break down how that psychological quirk is the secret to building products people don't just use, but absolutely love.
This quote, this right here, gets to the absolute heart of a paradox we're all living in. For years, the gospel has been, make it easy, one-click ordering, seamless experience. The goal was always to remove friction. But what if that was a trap? What if, in our race to make everything effortless, we accidentally engineered the affection right out of our products? It turns out, effort isn't a bug. It's the feature that creates connection.
So just let that sink in for a second. What if the very thing you're optimizing for, convenience, is actually making you invisible? What if making everything so seamless and automated has turned your product into a commodity? You know, something that's easy to use, but just as easy to forget, and even easier to replace the second something shinier or cheaper comes along. This is the exact problem the IKEA Effect is here to solve. It's how you go from being just a tool to being a treasured creation.
So here's our game plan for this deep dive. First, we're going to define the frictionless trap and really see why it's so dangerous. Then, we'll get into the solution, a framework called the co-creation loop. From there, we'll geek out on the psychology that makes it all tick. Then, we'll get super practical with a plan you can actually use. And finally, we'll tie it all together with a powerful new way to think about your customer.
Okay, let's kick things off with part one, the frictionless trap. The core idea here is deceptively simple. When we remove every single obstacle for our users, when we ask nothing of them, we create a sense of indifference. A product that demands zero effort from us gets zero emotional investment in return. It's so easy to use, it becomes just as easy to leave.
And the difference this makes, well, it's night and day. On one side, you have the passive user. This is the person in a totally automated experience. They feel, well, pretty much nothing. Indifference. They have zero sense of ownership. And look at that number. Their risk of churning, of just leaving, is 5 times higher. 5. Now look at the other side, the creator. This is someone who is asked to chip in, to build a little something. Their psychological state, it's pride. They feel a real sense of ownership, and their churn risk is incredibly low because they're not just a user, they're a builder.
There's a brilliant term for this problem, utility sterility. Think about it. It's when a product is perfectly useful, but completely sterile, completely devoid of any emotional connection. Imagine ordering a pizza with one click. It's fast, it's easy, and it's totally forgettable. Now compare that to a meal kit service. You've got to chop the onions, mix the sauce, cook the pasta. You put in the work. And because of that, the final meal feels like your creation. It has meaning. Utility sterility is what happens when a product requires nothing from you, and in return, it gets no real loyalty.
So, if the frictionless world is a trap, how do we get out? The answer is a powerful mechanism called the co-creation loop. And this isn't some vague, fluffy concept. It is a strategic, repeatable process for engineering real customer investment and honestly genuine affection for your product.
Now, this loop is best understood as a 3-step process. Each step is designed to pull the user deeper into a relationship with what you've made. It all starts with something called the guided build, then moves to a critical psychological moment called the competence trigger, and it all leads to this incredibly powerful state called the identity merge. So let's break down each one. All right, step 1, the guided build. The key here is balance. You don't just hand someone the keys to a finished car, but you also don't dump a pile of engine parts on their lawn. You provide the scaffolding. You give them the basic structure, and then you ask them to make a few important choices. Think about a website builder that gives you a gorgeous template, but you get to pick the color scheme and the main photo. Those small, guided decisions are everything. They kickstart active participation and make the user feel invested from moment one. Now, step 2 is the absolute secret sauce of the IKEA Effect. It's called the competence trigger. The task you give your user has to be perfectly designed. It needs to be just challenging enough to feel like a real accomplishment, but your system has to be set up to guarantee they get a great result. It's got to be almost impossible to fail. Why? Because the goal is to make them feel a sense of self-efficacy, that deep, powerful feeling of, hey, I can do this. When they finish, they don't just see a good outcome, they feel capable and smart. I mean, just think about how powerful that is. When you get this right,
The user isn't impressed with your product, they're impressed with themselves. You haven't shown off how clever your software is, you've made them feel clever for using it. Your product becomes the tool that unlocks their own genius. And that is a profound psychological shift from being a passive consumer to an empowered creator.
And that feeling of competence leads us right into the final amazing step, the identity merge. After they've invested their time, made their choices, and felt that rush of success, the product is no longer just some external tool. It becomes a part of them. It's a reflection of their taste, their skill, their effort. And at that point, leaving for a competitor isn't just a practical decision. It feels like abandoning a piece of their own work, a piece of themselves. And that creates a massive emotional barrier to churn that no simple feature list can ever compete with.
Okay, so we've got the what and the how. But you might be wondering, why does this work so reliably? Well, this isn't just a clever marketing trick. It's actually rooted in some deep, fundamental principles of human psychology. This is where we get into the real science behind it all.
So, first up is something called self-determination theory. It sounds academic, but the idea is actually very simple. It says that all of us are hardwired with a few core biological needs. One of the biggest, the need to feel competent. We have a fundamental, driving hunger to feel capable and effective. And when you design an experience that lets a user overcome a challenge and succeed, you are literally feeding that deep psychological need. You're not just providing utility, you're providing fulfillment.
The second big principle is effort justification. This is a fascinating quirk of our brains. We have a cognitive bias that automatically makes us value things more if we had to work for them. It's why that meal you spent an hour cooking just tastes better than takeout. It's why the view from a mountain you had to hike up feels more beautiful. Our brain's logic is simple. If I worked hard for this, it must be valuable. By asking for a little bit of effort, you are literally hacking your user's brain to increase the perceived value of your product.
All right, we've covered the theory. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How do you actually put this into practice? Let's move from the science to a real actionable framework you can use to start applying meaningful labor today. The most practical way to think about this comes down to a single memorable number, 60, as in 60 seconds. This should be your target. Your goal is to give a brand new user their very first taste of competence, their very first I did it moment within the first minute of their experience. That first win is everything.
So here's your 3-step playbook. First, run a labor audit. Go through your product and actively look for places where it's too easy, too automated. Then add one small, meaningful task, like asking a user to create their first playlist. Second, apply the 60-second build rule. Make sure they can complete that first task and get a visible win in under a minute. And finally, step 3, celebrate the success state. When they do it, make a little bit of a fuss. A fun animation, a shower of confetti, a satisfying sound. Anything that reinforces to their brain, hey, you did it, and you're awesome. And that brings us to our final, and I think most important insight. To really make this work, you have to fundamentally shift how you view the people you serve. They're not just passive eyeballs or wallets to be captured. They are potential collaborators, just waiting for the chance to create something.
This leads to a really wild, counterintuitive idea. The best, most loved products are, in a very real sense, half-finished. I know that sounds crazy, but it's the whole philosophy in a nutshell. You have to intentionally leave room for the user to step in, to contribute, to add their own personal touch. Your job isn't to build them a perfect, finished palace. It's to give them the blueprints, the tools, and let them help build it.
And this right here is the ultimate takeaway. True loyalty isn't created by pushing people through some frictionless funnel. It's created by pulling them toward value. Value they feel a deep sense of ownership over because they helped build the path themselves. When you embrace the IKEA effect, you stop just building a product and you start building a loyal community of creators who are now deeply invested in their own success and, by extension, yours.